Okay, but from a monetary historian, we went off gold. So what was the next step? Salmon P. Chase needed more money. You're not going to do this again. The banks are not going to fall for this twice. Okay, so what do you do now? Okay, the second thing that Salmon P. Chase did was something called legal tenders, or the greenbacks. And I brought to class today my own proud possession. The top one here is a greenback, okay, that's authorized by the Act of March 3rd, 1863. It's not the first Greenback Act. I think it was the third one. Ultimately, Congress, the Treasury, was authorized to issue $400 million worth of this stuff, okay? These are dollar bills that say on the top of them, this note is a legal tender for $1, okay? And what that means is nothing. You can't get gold for this. You can just exchange it for another dollar bill, okay? That's it, okay? The U.S. is off the gold standard. It's not legal tender for anything except payments within the United States. You're not allowed to refuse this as payment for a debt in the United States. So let's just now play this out, the second phase, and understand how this worked. Okay, so we're running out of room there. So let's start here again with the same set of balance sheets. We have the government. We have the private sector. We have the private sector. And we have the banking system. Young is, by the way, in these passages, drawing heavily on the work of his friend, Wesley Clare Mitchell, who wrote a great book called The Greenbacks about this whole period, which I've assigned sometimes, not in this class, but in other classes where we're reading great texts. Wesley Clare Mitchell, I see no recognition of this name at all, okay? But he was a very famous professor here at Columbia. And he taught here for many, many decades, okay? And he was basically one of Alan Young's best friends. They grew up together and went to graduate school together and so forth. So he's leaning on the historical research and quantitative research. Wesley Clare Mitchell was one of the founders of the National Bureau of Economic Research, as a matter of fact, which is a big deal here. Big American institutionalist quantitative economist. Okay, that's just an aside. So how do legal tenders work? Legal tenders work this way. Okay, that the government is buying war goods from the private sector for legal tenders. It's just giving them these pieces of paper here, and I'll write that number, 400 million. There were not actually 400 million ever totally issued, but almost 400 million were issued. So it's a lot of money there. Okay, that's what the private sector. So the private sector is accepting this in payment, and the government is getting the war goods. So the government gets war goods here as its own asset, and it is printing these legal tenders here. Young is pretty aghast at this. You can see in this article, government's under pressure. If you're fighting a war, you do what it takes to win the war. Okay, so and he appreciates that, but you'll see there's a better way to do this, which we're going to come to in the third one. Probably Salmon P. Chase underestimated the bond market at this time, so he starts to print money. And what happens to these legal tenders is that they get deposited in the banking system, or some of them, because the banking system still exists. So I'm going to say, just for example here, so this is stage one, that the private sector is taking this $400 million worth of greenbacks, and they deposit 100 million in the bank. Okay. They deposit it in the bank. The legal tenders then become the asset of the banking system, and it's the legal tenders that become the reserves of the banking system. So that if somebody is withdrawing their deposit, they're withdrawing their deposit not in gold, but in these legal tenders. Essentially what Salmon P. Chase did in the hierarchy of money was to insert this sort of legal tender money in between gold and deposits, okay, to insert it at the top of the US hierarchy, okay, and as a form of war finance, $400 million here. Okay. This had, you could never use these legal tenders, by the way, to buy foreign war goods. Okay, that's what the gold was for. Okay, this is to buy domestic war goods. Okay, foreigners, if you try to use legal tenders to buy things, they're going to say, well, but what's the gold value of these legal tenders? Let me trade this for gold. And so he makes a big deal that throughout the war, the value of these legal tenders kept falling relative to gold. Okay, and they eventually fell to 50 cents on the dollar, so that there was this exchange rate effect through the falling value of the dollar internationally. There's also domestic inflation. The price level is rising domestically as a consequence of this too, because the government is basically buying things without making anyone else buy anything less. Okay, so it's not, whereas here, when you're saying, I'm going to give you a bond, you're going to give me your deposits, you're reducing the purchasing power of the private sector. Here you're just adding purchasing power that didn't exist before. Okay? And the consequence of this is to depreciate the value of these legal tenders relative to the pre-war par.